The question is that this House has considered e-petitions 272087 and 575833 relating to online abuse. Damian Collins.
Thank you, Sorter. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak in this debate and to address the petitions on online abuse, which in themselves reflect the understandable growing public concern about the prevalence of abusive material and abusive behaviour online, and in particular on social media. When I chaired the Joint Select Committee on the Online Safety Bill, the pre-legislative scrutiny committee, we had consistent evidence from people about the nature of the abuse that they'd faced online and how that abuse creates spaces online where not only are people targeted, but where hate speech is normalised, where racist speech is normalised, where vile abuse and extremism has become normalised within the echo chambers of certain sections of social media. And people are frustrated because they've raised these concerns. They've raised them directly with the social media platforms. They've raised them with their Member of Parliament. They've raised them with the government. And they're left in a position where the sort of action they think should be taken to combat the sort of abusive behaviour that if it took place in the community, in a public space, would see action, that they're frustrated that action is not being taken online. People cannot just log out of their accounts. People cannot just say, well, the easiest way to avoid online abuse is not to be online. Many people are required to be online because of the nature of the work that they do. Why should people not be able to be online and enjoy, as Honourable Lady said, the connectivity that comes from being on social media without being the victim and target of abuse? We don't create spaces for abuse in the physical world. We shouldn't only create those spaces in the online world either. At the heart of the Online Safety Bill, which, as members said, is a big bill. It's quite a complicated bill. I would urge everyone to read the 60,000-word report of the Joint Committee. The bill is a lot simpler and a lot clearer once you've read the report. But the heart of it is something really simple, I believe, and that is to say that activity that is illegal offline should be regulated online. That's really what it's about. That the laws that Parliament has created and that our courts enforce offline can be applied online as well, and to see that offences aren't just committed by someone who abuses another person, but they're committed by a platform that actively hosts and amplifies and creates an audience for that content, that there is liability for the platforms in combating abuse. And indeed, without that liability, we will not be able to do it. Online platforms should not be amplifying abusive behaviour to others. The shocking incident, well, it is only one, the shocking incident last summer where members of the England national football team were the subject of racist abuse after the final of the European Championships. An incident that had been foreseen, that the football authorities had warned the social media companies would be a problem, and yet they did nothing to combat. It wasn't just that abuse that was foreseeable, could have been predicted, wasn't acted on and stopped. It was that the systems of the social media companies were making people aware that the abuse was taking place and even highlighting some of the key words. People were prosecuted following the event in the courts because of their use of racist language and racial abuse directed towards other people. So we know what the offences are, we know what the thresholds are for legal action and for the enforcement of that, and therefore that standard should be enforced online. And that's why what the Online Safety Bill should do is, in regulating illegal activity online, is set the minimum standards that are required, set the safety standards we think should be set. So they're not based on terms of service written by American technology companies in California. They're based on our laws and the thresholds we set to keep people safe, and they should be proactively enforced. The company shouldn't just be waiting for people to complain. They should be proactively looking for this content. I just really want to focus my remarks in this debate on what I think is an important part of the bill, an important part to get right, and that is the area of priority harms, the term that's been used around legal but harmful. Now, there is clear illegal content that exists. Child abuse, terrorist offences, it's clearly illegal content. You don't need context to understand why it's bad. But the government is proposing creating a schedule of priority harms of other offences. And I'm pleased to see the steps the government has taken since the Joint Committee report was published in writing more of those offences onto the face of the bill so it's absolutely clear when they apply. But I think we do need certainty. I think victims need to know that an offence has been committed. They should be seeking redress based on the fact that an offence has been committed towards them. The social media companies need to know which offences are in scope and what they're expected to do in different situations. The regulator needs to give certainty based on the law and its regulatory powers as to where those thresholds sit. And that is why the Joint Committee recommended removing the definition of legal but harmful from the bill and instead writing into the bill those offences that should be applied. So it's really clear which offences are in scope. I would even say once the regulator is established, and the regulator's first job is to create the risk registers from which it will create the codes of practice that apply to the different companies. The regulator would be well placed there if the regulator felt, if Ofcom felt, that there were gaps, that there were offences that hadn't been included in the bill that should have been, or maybe new offences that need to be created and added to the regulatory regime, added to the priority harm areas based on those laws. But I think it is much better to have the offences within the regulatory regime based on understood laws that Parliament has passed and the courts enforce, so that there is no ambiguity. I can understand the need to, the desire to want to future-proof the legislation and to say, well, something may happen that we can see is bad that we can't foresee, and therefore there should be the provision to regulate on that basis as well. But I think it's difficult to have enforcement. I think it's difficult to take enforcement action against a social media company for not acting against content that wasn't prescribed and wasn't recognised by the regulator. I actually think the government has done a good job in bringing so many of these offences into the bill, onto the face of the bill. One of the concerns was, would legislation like the equalities legislation be enforceable online? How would we enforce race hate and other forms of abuse online? I think the government's made it clear now how that can be done. But I think it would be better to have the regulatory regime based on those offences named in the bill, rather than having an additional general definition of something that is legal but harmful that could fall within scope there. Because I don't believe the government's intention is for the regulator to start creating new offences. I think the government wants to bring clarity to it. But I think having that tight focus on those existing offences in law, as regulated through the codes of practice, which set the minimum safety standards, I think gives more clarity and more certainty, and I think that's what people want. People want to know what they're being protected from. People want to know the companies have to be proactive for removing certain sorts of content, and there's no ambiguity, there's no confusion over what that is and how that should be done. So as the Minister responds to this debate and with his colleagues, the government gives its final thoughts to the drafting of the final version of the Online Safety Bill. That was just one thing I would ask them to bear in mind. I think bringing that clarity and that certainty, both the people that are concerned about freedom of expression and people that want the certainty of knowing that offences will be covered in the bill, I think will give it a lot more clarity.